Your husband's controlling interest in Frank Custom Interiors passes to Melissa Grant. I stared at the attorney. I'm sorry, what? He lowered his eyes to the will and continued. His designated savings and investment accounts also passed to Ms. Grant, his interest in the marital residence. Stop. The word barely came out. Beside me, my younger sister Melissa covered her mouth and started crying. Then she reached for my hand. Jenny, she whispered, squeezing my fingers, Daniel must have had his reasons. That sentence hurt more than anything the lawyer had read. My husband had been dead for 8 days. I had spent his final months feeding him, helping him walk, sleeping beside his bed, and now I was being told he'd left our home, our business, even our savings to my sister. Melissa wiped her eyes. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of? In my own house, with the company I had helped Daniel build. Then my fingers touched something inside my coat pocket. An envelope. The one Daniel had given me 4 days before he died. And suddenly, I remembered exactly what he'd told me. If anything happens that makes you doubt me, open this in front of witnesses. I slowly pulled it out. Melissa stopped crying. The conference room had been silent before, but now it felt frozen. Daniel's longtime attorney leaned forward. Mrs. Frank, what is that? I don't know. And that was the truth. 8 days of grief had left me moving through life almost mechanically. I had come to this meeting expecting signatures, account transfers, maybe questions about Frank Custom Interiors. Daniel and I had spent 9 years building that company and the life around it. I had never imagined sitting across from my own sister while a lawyer handed her everything. I looked at him. When was this will signed? He checked the document. 6 weeks before Daniel passed. My stomach tightened. 6 weeks earlier, Daniel had already been seriously ill. And Melissa had been around constantly. She had volunteered to handle company paperwork while I cared for him. She spent hours in his study. Sometimes I'd walk toward the door and hear their voices drop. Other times, conversations simply stopped when I entered. Back then, I'd forced myself not to think the worst. Now every memory returned differently. I looked at Melissa. She was already composing herself. Jenny, she said softly, we shouldn't turn this into something ugly. Daniel made a decision. We should respect it. A decision to give you our house. It isn't like I'm throwing you onto the street. My chair scraped the floor as I shifted away from her. Melissa continued, once everything is settled, we can discuss what makes sense for you. For me. My sister was already speaking, as though she controlled my future. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. Daniel's signature crossed the back. Beneath it was a notary seal. I remembered him pressing it into my palm with what little strength he had left. He hadn't said, open this after I die. He had said, open this if something makes you doubt me. And somehow, 4 days before his death, my husband had known that moment was coming. So what had Daniel known was about to happen? 6 weeks before Daniel died, Melissa had seemed like the sister I was lucky to have. I had cut my work hours almost completely because Daniel could no longer manage ordinary things alone. Some mornings, getting him from the bedroom to the kitchen took 20 minutes. Between medications, doctor appointments, and sleepless nights, Frank Custom Interiors became something I simply couldn't manage. Melissa volunteered immediately. I'll handle the office, she told me. You take care of Daniel. At first, I was grateful. Then the boundaries began shifting. Melissa started bringing folders home for Daniel to sign. She took business calls outside. Whenever I asked what was happening with the company, she'd say, Jenny, Daniel doesn't need more stress right now. One evening, I walked into Daniel's study without knocking. Melissa immediately slid several papers into a folder. Daniel was slumped in his chair, his eyes heavy from medication. What did he just sign? I asked. Routine authorization. Authorization for what? Melissa snapped the folder shut. Company operations. Daniel lifted his head. Jenny, He needs to rest, Melissa interrupted. I looked at her, then at my husband. Something about that moment stayed with me. That night, after Melissa left, I sat beside Daniel in our bedroom. Tell me the truth. His eyes moved toward mine. About what? You and Melissa. Daniel frowned. Is something happening between you two? For several seconds, he simply stared at me. Then his expression changed, not to guilt, but alarm. Has she said something to you? No. Has she told you anything about me? No, Daniel. Why would you ask that? He looked toward the bedroom door. Nothing. That answer didn't comfort me. 2 days later, Daniel surprised me. I need you to drive me downtown tomorrow. For another appointment. Yes. What kind? I need you to trust me. The next afternoon, I drove him to an office building and waited in the car exactly as he requested. Nearly 90 minutes later, Daniel came outside carrying a plain envelope. He wouldn't tell me what was inside. 4 days before he died, he finally placed that same envelope in my hands. Don't open it yet. Daniel, you're scaring me. I need you to react to facts when the time comes, Jenny, not fear. He made me promise. Now, sitting inside that conference room after his death, I finally understood why those words had sounded so strange. I held the envelope between both hands. Across the table, Melissa stared at it. Her tears disappeared. What is that? She asked. Something Daniel gave me. When? 4 days before he died. Melissa went completely still. Then, without warning, she lunged across the conference table and grabbed for the envelope. I jerked the envelope against my chest before Melissa could touch it. Sit down, Ms. Grant, the attorney said sharply. Melissa froze halfway across the table. I was only trying to help her. By grabbing something out of my hands, I asked. She slowly sat back. For the first time since the reading began, Melissa didn't look like the grieving sister trying to comfort me. She looked frightened. I turned to the attorney. Before anyone opens this, examine it. He took the envelope carefully and inspected the seal. Daniel gave this directly to you. Yes. He studied the back. There's a notary seal. Daniel's signature is here as well. Then his eyes stopped on the date. His expression tightened. What? I asked. He looked from me to Melissa. This was notarized 11 days after the will I've just read was executed. Melissa immediately leaned forward. That proves nothing. Daniel was sick. He was taking powerful medication. Anything he signed that late should be questioned. I stared at her. You didn't seem worried about his medication 5 minutes ago. Her mouth closed. The will giving you everything was signed while he was sick too, I continued. But that document was perfectly acceptable until I pulled this out. That's different. How? Melissa's voice rose. Because that wasn't what Daniel agreed to when I brought him the papers. Nobody moved. The attorney slowly lowered the envelope. I leaned toward her. What papers? Melissa blinked. I meant business papers. You said Daniel agreed to them. I misspoke. The attorney intervened. Ms. Grant, were you involved in arranging the execution of the will I read today? Melissa hesitated. I drove him. Were you in communication with the office that prepared it? Another pause. Yes, Daniel was ill. I was helping. I felt something shift inside me. Those closed doors. The whispered conversations. The papers disappearing whenever I entered. For weeks, I had wondered whether my husband and sister were hiding a relationship. But what if the secret between them had never been romantic? What if Melissa had been hiding paperwork? The attorney placed the envelope flat on the table. Mrs. Frank, because this may contain a later testamentary instrument, I recommend that we open it here, document its contents, and suspend any assumptions about distribution until we know what we're dealing with. Melissa shook her head. Jenny, don't. I looked directly at her. Open it. The attorney carefully broke the seal. He removed several documents and a folded handwritten letter. Then he read the heading on the first page. His eyes lifted toward Melissa. Revocation and codicil regarding undue influence. Stop. Melissa shot to her feet. This meeting needs to stop right now. The attorney didn't move. Mrs. Frank has requested that the document be examined. You don't know whether Daniel was competent when he signed that. The attorney turned the first page. Apparently, someone anticipated that argument. Melissa's face changed. Attached behind the codicil was confirmation that Daniel had independently met with another estate attorney after becoming concerned about documents presented to him during his illness. There was also documentation confirming that his mental capacity had been evaluated when the later amendment was executed. Then I saw the date. The downtown appointment. The 90 minutes Daniel had made me wait in the car suddenly made sense. He knew, I whispered. The attorney continued through the attachments. Daniel had listed documents he believed he'd signed after their contents had been described to him inaccurately. One date matched exactly. The will sitting on the conference table. The will that supposedly gave Melissa everything. Melissa shook her head. Daniel knew what he was signing. I looked at her. Then, why did he secretly hire another attorney 11 days later? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel's longtime attorney closed the original will. Until this later instrument is formally authenticated, no distribution should proceed. Melissa stared at him. What does that mean? It means you don't take control of anything today. Her expected inheritance stopped in that sentence. She couldn't transfer Daniel's business interest. She couldn't claim his share of our home. She couldn't access the estate-controlled funds she had been discussing as if they already belonged to her. Then I noticed one final item inside the envelope. A folded sheet with one word written across the front. Jenny. I knew Daniel's handwriting instantly. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The first lines explained why he'd kept everything from me. He feared that if Melissa realized he'd discovered what was happening, documents and records might disappear before he could protect me. I kept reading. Then I reached the paragraph explaining what Daniel believed Melissa had actually done. My eyes lifted from the page. Melissa saw my expression. She suddenly stood again. Jenny, whatever he wrote, you need to understand why I did it. Sit down, Melissa. My sister stared at me as though she didn't recognize the woman speaking. Maybe she didn't. For years, I had been the sister who avoided arguments, forgave too quickly, and trusted people long after they gave me reasons not to. But Daniel's letter was in my hands now. And I kept reading. Melissa had started helping Frank Custom Interiors legitimately. Daniel confirmed that much. When his illness worsened, he had been grateful that she handled schedules, correspondence, and paperwork while I cared for him. Then she began pushing further. According to Daniel, Melissa repeatedly told him I would never be capable of running the company. She told him I'd sell it after his death. That everything he'd spent years building would disappear because I was too emotional and inexperienced to protect it. Daniel resisted. So Melissa changed tactics. She began presenting documents alongside ordinary company paperwork and describing them as routine business and estate planning updates. Then Daniel discovered what one of those documents actually did. It transferred almost his entire estate to Melissa. The business, his interest in our home, the savings and investments covered by his estate plan. Everything I had just heard read aloud. I lowered the letter. You knew. Melissa's jaw tightened. I was protecting what Daniel built. You were taking it. No, Jenny, listen to me. You were exhausted. You weren't involved in the company anymore. Because I was caring for my dying husband. She flinched. I returned to the letter. Daniel wrote that once he understood what had happened, he chose not to confront Melissa. Instead, he arranged the downtown meeting with an independent estate attorney. That meeting produced the document, now sitting on the table. The later notarized codicil explicitly revoked the provisions benefiting Melissa. Daniel's interest in our home went to me. His controlling interest in Frank Custom Interiors went to me. The savings and investment assets covered by the estate plan remained mine, as Daniel had intended. And Daniel instructed the executor to investigate documents obtained, while Melissa had been acting as his informal business assistant. Melissa pushed her chair backward. You can't seriously believe I was trying to hurt him. I looked at her. I believe his signature. Then I reached Daniel's final paragraph. My voice almost failed me. He apologized for keeping me in the dark. He wrote that his silence had never meant he was choosing Melissa over me. He had simply wanted enough time to protect what we'd built before anyone could interfere. His final request was one sentence. Please don't let what she did become your last memory of me. I stopped. Nobody spoke. Melissa wasn't crying anymore. Instead, she folded her arms. You don't understand that company the way I do, she said. Daniel knew that. I was trying to make sure someone capable protected it. I placed the letter on the table. Stealing someone's choice isn't protection. The later codicil was subsequently authenticated as properly executed. Because it came after the earlier will, its conflicting provisions controlled the distribution of Daniel's estate. Melissa received no controlling interest in Frank Custom Interiors. She received no claim to my home. She received no control over the savings she'd apparently expected to manage. The questionable documents were referred for legal review, and Melissa was removed from all company access while the records were examined. She contacted me repeatedly afterward. First, she wanted to explain. Then she wanted us to settle this as sisters. I refused. Our relatives eventually learned what had happened too. The story they had initially heard, that Daniel had deliberately abandoned his wife and chosen her sister, collapsed with that conference room reading. Melissa had entered that room believing she would leave controlling my husband's company, his assets, and even the roof over my head. Instead, she left with none of that power. I left carrying Daniel's letter. Months later, I still live in the home Daniel and I built together. Frank Custom Interiors is still operating. I didn't pretend I could replace Daniel overnight. I kept the experienced management team around me and learned the parts of the business he had always handled himself. Melissa is no longer part of my life. Daniel's letter stays, locked inside my desk. I don't keep it there as evidence anymore. I keep it because whenever I remember that terrible moment at the will reading, when I believed my husband had betrayed me with my own sister, I can also remember what was actually inside that envelope. I had entered that room believing my husband had left everything to my sister. But when I opened his envelope, I discovered the one thing Melissa had never managed to take from me. The truth.